The four-story brick building has been a fixture between Allen's Avenue and the Providence waterfront since 1899. Patrick Conley bought the turn-of-the-century building more than a decade ago, and later envisioned Conley's Wharf as part of a plan to transform the north end of the waterfront into a mixed-use area with restaurants, hotels, and residences. Conley's company, Providence Piers, invested $7 million to transform the building, including this fourth-floor meeting room overlooking the Providence River.
Well, it was kind of a bottomless pit. We hadn't anticipated that kind of a cost, but as we got into it, the cost rose.
When it was finished, the building, which had received state and federal tax credits, went onto the National Register of Historic Places and began to attract tenants. But in late 2011, Sims Metal Management bought land adjacent to Conley's property and began stockpiling scrap metal. It's a familiar sight to anyone traveling on Route 95 North the past 5 years. And from Conley's building next door, the view goes from this to this.
They actually closed and dumped their first scrap right on the land itself without even putting a concrete pad, which they've done since. They just dumped the scrap in October, November of 2011, and they built the scrap pile initially up to a height of almost 80 feet. Millions of tons of scrap.
And that, Conley said, had an immediate effect on his building.
And all of a sudden, cracks started to appear throughout those additions, totaling about 8,000 or 9,000 square feet, and to the point where they had to be vacated because they were unsafe, because that area could collapse at any minute because the cracks are an inch and two wide and getting wider all the time.
Providence Piers filed a lawsuit in U.S. District Court in Providence, seeking injunctions to stop Sims, all of which were denied.
Do you feel like the defendants are just trying to run the clock here?
Oh, no question. They feel that the longer they can string this out, the more likely I am to run out of money.
Sims maintains that it is not responsible for any of the damage and that Conley's building was settling anyway. We twice emailed one of the Providence attorneys representing Sims, asking for an interview about the lawsuit. After no response, we called Jeffrey Milsom, asking if he'd received our emails. He said he had. When we asked if he planned on getting back to us, he said no. And that ended the conversation.
You would have thought that these emergency motions, all of which were denied, would have at least speeded up the case and that a trial would have been scheduled. And we're at the start of the 5th year, and still we do not have a trial date. Now, I don't want to speculate on why we don't. I have feelings about that, but should I speculate too precisely, I could end up in the Central Falls detention facility.
Sims, he said, did enter mediation, which has also contributed to the delay, but offered $50,000 compensation, something Conley says was not even close to a good faith offer. The situation has caused an exodus at 200 Allen's Avenue.
And because of the arrival of Sims, the damages that were caused to particularly the lower level of the building where many of the artist studios were located, and toxic emissions of particulate matter from the scrap pile, they decided not to renew their lease. So we lost our main tenant, and then some of the other tenants moved out as well.
Conley says Rhode Island's Department of Transportation and Environmental Management have both dropped the ball. DOT, he says, is ignoring a law that regulates junkyards within 1,000 feet of a federal highway, such as Route 95.
The scrap pile, which had reached 80 feet and usually maintains a height of about 60, was entirely visible from the interstate. And the problem with that is that under federal law, replicated in state law, when you have a scrapyard, you have to shield it from interstate traffic. And the only thing they did, they put some trees up, kind of to block it if you were driving in the northbound lane on Allen's Avenue. Now, the only way you would block that pile would be to plant mature sequoias.
We asked DOT 3 weeks ago to respond to Conley's assertion. A spokesman for DOT Director Peter Alviti issued a one-line statement to us on Monday. At this time, it would not be appropriate to comment further, given the possibility of litigation. Then there's DEM, which cited Sims after it first opened for a pollution violation. The company in 2012 settled for $25,000, and a DEM spokeswoman says Sims is currently in compliance with the state.
And we were able to preserve it, make it economically viable, and place it on the National Register. So it's a historic site, and yet the state has shown no interest whatsoever in protecting this historic site. If we went up to Benefit Street or somewhere else and started trashing a historic property, there'd be an outrage. This is a historic property. No one cares.
Conley says DEM doesn't want to take on a large company with deep pockets.
They don't like to undertake campaigns against heavily funded entities. Sims is a global corporation, billions of dollars in assets. DEM doesn't have the ability or the resources to get into a protracted battle with Sims. If you're small enough and you don't have the resources to fight them, and you've done something wrong or maybe something questionable, they'll nail you. But when it comes to taking on Sims, forget it.
Conley says he's simply asking for his day in court, but understands why the defendants don't want to see this case go to a jury.
There will be a verdict in our favor for damages. They've caused damages. It's incontrovertible that the building has been damaged in some way and to some amount by the activities of Sims. It'll be up to a jury, guided by the judge, of course, to make a determination as to the extent of the damages. We certainly would want to bring the jury over for a visit, and walk them through that building and make their own decision as to whether or not these millions of tons of steel within 100 feet of this building could have caused the damages that they will be witnessing.
In Providence, Jim Hummel for the Hummel Report.